It is my pleasure once again to be here with a very special guest because it's always something that I love to do, to bring someone to this space who has accomplished a lot and continues to do much. Because it is one of the ways that we realize what moves our world and how things get going. But it's also, I do that also because it is always my desire to engage the best minds among us in dialogues that not only challenge us, but also help us to take some introspective looks at ourselves and the world that we live in. It is my pleasure to welcome today Dr. Olusola Togun-Butler. It is my hope that when we hear what she does, when we hear about what she does and how much she's done, we also will be reminded of our responsibility, each of us, the responsibility that we have to continue to do our best to make the world a better place. Dr. Olusola Togun-Butler, who I think I will call Shala.
Yes.
He's an academic. She's also a psychotherapist and a businesswoman.
Yes.
And she is the owner of Butterfly Counseling Services in New York. Dr. Togun-Butler is a Nigerian American. Right. I would call her that because she has Nigerian parents, grew up in the United States, came off to the United States at age 12 with her parents. And she's bilingual English and Yoruba fluent speaker who loves to travel the world and learn many different cultures. I don't know where she gets the time to do that, considering how busy she is. But she has been on medical missions trips to India, the Philippines, and Kenya. I know it's not done. I know she's going to continue to do those missions trips, and I'd like to hear more about that today. She established the Victoria Ibironke Togun Scholarship Fund to provide educational opportunities to young girls and women in developing countries. Dr. Togun-Butler has a PhD in education from North Central University. Her master's degree in social work is from the Silverman School of Social Work at NYU, New York University, and holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Brooklyn College. She's a licensed clinical social worker in the state of New York, New Jersey, and Ohio, and provides individual, couple, and family therapy sessions to adults and adolescents in New York, and virtual teletherapy, telehealth therapy via live video sessions in the state of New York, New Jersey, and Ohio. She's a certified clinical trauma professional, which is why I'll be asking questions about trauma today. And she's also a certified dialectical behavior therapist and a member of New York City Cognitive Behavior Therapy Association. She was previously a professor in the Human Services Department at St. Joseph's College. And she's the author of a children's book titled, Where Do You Keep the Lions? An African Girl's First Day of School in America. We have discussed that.
Yes, we have.
She was here several years ago. We had a discussion about that book, but I like to hear more about that today. Sure. So Dr. Olusola Togun-Butler, welcome to this space.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
It's really great to see you. And, you know, I am going to start just by asking you, why and when did you know that you wanted to be a social worker?
When I was young, my father worked as a psychiatrist. This is when we were in Nigeria. And my father was very open about mental health. He was also open about cultural perceptions of mental health, where there was very much a stigma associated with mental health. And that's when I became very interested in mental health, very interested in behavior, what makes us do the things that we do. And that interest carried over to me when I got to college. And I was looking for ways in which I can make this a career. And I had the wonderful opportunity of having a professor, Professor Weisberg, who guided me into becoming a social worker. And that's when the desire became very strong. And when I did research about social work, I felt that that was my calling. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to challenge the stigma associated with mental health, and also the challenge the belief that only certain people struggle with mental health issues, where the reality is that we all deal with mental health issues from time to time. So I have to give credit to my dad. As a psychiatrist, he piqued that interest in me. When I got to college, it was definitely Professor Weisberg. I remember many days in his office, but we'll talk about social work, and him telling me that he felt that that was my calling, and then doing my research and feeling like this is what I wanted to do. I could not imagine doing anything else than being a social worker.
Well, I think your dad will be pleased to hear that you gave him credit, and I
Yes.
know you always do. I think it was his education, his
Mm-hmm.
psychiatry profession, actually, that
Yes,
brought him to the United States many years ago.
that is correct. Yes, he came to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore through a fellowship. So that's what brought him here initially. And then eventually, as a family, we followed him here as well.
Yeah, and your mother is a medical doctor, right?
That's right. My mother is a pediatrician in the state of Louisiana, and she does great work. My mom's very passionate about working with children, and she is 76 years old and continues to work. So she's also an inspiration as well.
Yeah, I like the fact that you started this conversation by talking about the stigma associated with mental health. And I think that you and I know it's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't seek mental health treatment even when they need it.
That is correct.
What would you want to say to such people, especially people who come from the kind of culture that your parents and I come from, that you and I come from,
That's
because I
right.
know that you're very proud to associate with Nigeria.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm very proud to be Nigerian American. I maintain very close ties to Nigeria, very close ties to my roots, and a lot of pride in being Nigerian. And the one thing I always say is that there is no shame in seeking help. And then the other factor that I address is, as I had mentioned earlier, we all deal with mental health issues from time to time. And I think when I say that, that resonates with people because it's the realization that I'm not alone in what I'm dealing with, that other people deal with the same issues. So, especially with COVID-19, it really brought mental health to the forefront, where people were dealing with depression, anxiety, grief, and loss, and realizing like this is part of the human experience. And it's okay to talk about what it is that I am going through and what I am dealing with. And I think that resonates, the feeling like you're not isolated, you're not alone in what you are experiencing. And also too, working with religious leaders to really get out the message about mental health. That yes, you can go to church and you can see your therapist as well. That's perfectly fine. So more and more religious leaders in my conversations with them in Nigeria are beginning to talk about mental health. And it's really resonating with their parishioners to hear their religious leaders say that yes, you can come to church, or you can go to the mosque, and you can also go and speak to a mental health professional. So it's not one or the other. Both of them are perfectly fine.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you said that because I recall many, many years ago, I'm not going to say how many now, I was invited to speak to a group of Christians about my profession. And so when I finished speaking, one of them said to me, how is it that you call yourself a Christian and you would take people through this process when they come to you for help instead of you just praying with them and telling them that Jesus is the answer and sending away.
Yes. Hmm.
And I said, well, I am not trying to attribute the power of healing to myself. But
Yes.
I think that even as a Christian, whether we like it or not, by the time I get off this podium, many women and children across America would have been abused, and many of them
Mm.
will be Christians. And
Yes.
it's
Yes.
important for us to know that and to understand that people need help, and
Yes.
we should be there to provide them the help that they need. And by the way, just as a teacher of mathematics just does, who is a Christian, just doesn't pray and say that the mathematics problem is now solved, and the
Right.
chemistry teacher just doesn't do that. I do my job and not just say, oh, uh, let's pray it's done. But even here in the
Yes.
United States,
Hmm.
there's still that for people who are people of color,
Yes.
we know that there is still the stigma
Mm-hmm.
that has to be wrestled with as far as whether or not they seek mental health care.
That is very true. And I see that in clients that reach out to Butterfly Counseling Services. They speak very openly about not wanting family members to know that they're seeking therapy because of some cultural beliefs that we keep the family business within the family. You do not speak to strangers about what is going on, or you can just pray about it. You don't need to see a therapist. And I think the connection in terms of people of color seeking mental health services is mental health practitioners of color. There's that connection that there's the understanding, like you understand my culture, you understand the perception around mental health. So it's not, as a Nigerian American, Nigerians do reach out to me seeking mental health because they feel like there's the understanding of the cultural factor of making sure that the mental health services that they receive is culturally competent and culturally sensitive. The understanding of culture and the impact that it has on how we see the world. So yeah, it's working through with clients some of those cultural beliefs that they've internalized, telling them that they should not seek mental health services, and beginning to see that the tide is turning and there's more acceptance of mental health services, as long as practitioners are aware of cultural beliefs, cultural acceptance, and are willing to be culturally sensitive as well.
Someone just posted the following on Facebook. I said, I cannot speak to the culture of Nigeria, but I can speak to the stigma around seeking mental health treatment, preventing people from seeking treatment, and it breaks my heart. But it makes me happy to see others doing this as well as, you go, like a thumbs up for you.
That's wonderful.
It is really work that we all have to wrestle with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know that I was previously at Adelphi University in New
Yes.
York,
Mm-hmm.
and just in the last few years, they began to, well, not the university, but
Mm-hmm.
one person in particular uh, thought of the idea to have a conference every year on Black men's mental health, Black
Yes,
men and mental health. So I
absolutely.
think they'll be having a thought conference this year.
That's
So
wonderful.
she initiated it,
Mm-hmm.
and the School of Social Work they supported it. We
Mm-hmm.
had a very innovative dean at the time who welcomed it. And so we had a first one, and then we had the second one last year.
Yes.
And they will be having the third one this year. And I recall that first one and even the second one, how receptive when people came. And for them,
Yes.
it was really like, oh no, this is big. Oh no, this is something that we need to be discussing. But the field of social work is very vast. It's not.
Yes.
So why did you choose to become a clinician?
I chose to become a clinician because of my passion around mental health and the fact that our mental health is just as important as our physical health. And also because coming culturally, growing up in Nigeria, talking with my dad and him being very open about the stigma associated with mental health, where my dad would say to me that when somebody was struggling with mental health issues, they were struggling in isolation. It was very difficult for them to seek help because of how they would be perceived, or the idea that if someone was struggling with mental health issues, it was because of demonic possession. So they needed to go to church and they needed to cast out the demons and they would be okay. And also the stigma in terms of would they be able to find somebody to marry if word got around that you had a mental health issue and you maybe down the line wanted to marry somebody, it could potentially get in the way of that. So it was that fascination that made me want to become a clinician and focus specifically on mental health in diverse communities, because I felt that the cultural belief was a factor. And also in the United States, what role does racism, discrimination, microaggression have on the mental health of people of color? So that was the reason that I decided that as a social worker, I wanted to specifically be a clinician, because of my interest in mental health and wanting to work with people who are dealing with mental health issues. And then on a larger scale, continue to challenge the stigma associated with receiving mental health services.
It seems to me then that maybe there's a cultural piece in, that contributes to the level of boldness and courage that you bring to your clinical practice. When you say, for example, I ask myself about, what role does racism, what role does discrimination, what role do microaggressions play in the symptoms that I am dealing with? I find myself that I am bold enough to ask those questions of my clients. And the reason is because when you don't ask those questions, sometimes you find that you don't really get to the root of the problems, that they are presented with. So I must ask you then, if you
Yes.
don't mind, when, for example, there is a George Floyd, or there is someone else. There are all these issues. So there is, even when you look around the world and some of the crises that we have, do you find then that sometimes you have to ask questions relating to some of those issues?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Because therapy becomes the safe space where clients can talk about the issues that are going on around the world, in their neighborhood, in their society, and the impact that it is having on their physical, emotional, and mental health. Because sometimes clients say, I can't talk to colleagues, or I can't talk to people about what I'm going through due to the fear of how they would be perceived. Could it potentially result in backlash at work? So therapy becomes that space, and I called it checking in with the clients, because, and I know we'll talk about this in our time together, we want to talk about like racial trauma, where sometimes people are dealing with vicarious trauma. It didn't happen to them, but it happened to a family member. They are seeing it on the news, and it's impacting how they navigate the world. And a quick example is around, what happened with George Floyd. We decided we were going to adopt a cat. So I had to go to Brooklyn to get the cat. And my daughter was asking me how I was going to get there. And I said I was going to drive to get the cat. And she said, well, why don't you take an Uber? I said, no, I'm going to drive to get the cat. She's like, why don't you take the train? I'm like, well, the train doesn't go there. So finally I asked my daughter, why are you concerned about how I'm going to get to the animal shelter? And she said, I don't want the police to pull you over and shoot you. So that means she was very much worried about me as a Black parent driving to get this cat, because she was concerned about what could potentially happen to me. So we have to create the space to have that conversation, because of the impact that it does have on our clients, and therapy becomes a safe space to be able to do so.
Indeed, it is. And because one of the things that tend to happen is that people in our skin, in our bodies, have to worry about things that some others don't have to worry about. And you're talking about a child worrying about you driving from Queens to Brooklyn. And then if that child, for example, if that child who is Black or biracial, then meets a clinician who is not representative of them,
Right.
is that clinician then able to understand the basis for that fear?
Yes.
Because for that a clinician, for example, then it's classified as paranoia, right?
Right.
And then you begin to look for things that are not there. For us, it's a
Exactly.
legitimate concern.
Absolutely.
But
And that
sometimes
is
it
why.
feels like we are objects of target practice for police officers.
That's correct. Yes. The impact of living in a society where you feel like you don't belong. And that was part of the research that I present on in conferences. It's mental health in ethnic minority groups, the impact of not belonging. and how that does impact your mental health. When you step out of your home, the impact of interactions, the microaggression, the racism, and how that impacts your mental health. And that is why when people of color are seeking mental health services, they want that to be part of the conversation. And when clinicians are not making that part of the conversation, can we truly say that it's culturally competent and culturally sensitive? So that is why for clinicians of color, our practices fill up very quickly.
Indeed, it does. It does. And,
Yes.
you know, you, I like the fact that you have this very firm grasp of culture,
Mhm.
and you remain grounded in the Nigerian culture of your parents and the one where you were born in, even though you
Yes.
left as a child. But I think your work is still cut out. Your work, my work,
Mhm.
because here is someone who is watching.
Mhm.
I'm sure from Nigeria. Yeah, he's
Okay.
watching from Nigeria. He
Mhm.
said mental health is greatly ignored in Nigeria. It is sadly rooted in superstitions. I think you
Yes.
mentioned something. You did allude to that earlier.
Yes,
Do
I
you want to
did.
talk more about that?
Yes. In talking to my dad will talk about, for example, if somebody was struggling with mental health issues, it was seen as a demonic possession, or the person was into some type of witchcraft, or so yes, just like the person that commented was saying, like it was based in all of those, kind of superstitions that have a negative connotation to it, which made it less likely for people to come out and want to talk about what they were struggling with or what they were dealing with. Or the idea that if someone is struggling with mental health issues, it was like the evil eye. So it's the evil eye that is the reason this person is dealing with this issue. Maybe not the fact that maybe they lost a child and they're grieving, or maybe there are societal factors that are impacting their mental health. So the person that made that comment is spot on. And that is what I love about my dad. He was very open about that dialogue. He would tell me time and time again as a psychiatrist that it was unfortunate that people are not coming forward because of these belief systems that have been internalized, not only by the individual, but society at large.
Right. We can have this conversation all day long, and the more I listen to you, the more I want to meet your dad because he was just, as a psychiatrist, he
Mhm.
was a man in that profession ahead of his
Yes.
time,
Hmm.
really well ahead of his time. And I am sure there are people watching now or who will see this later who will be thinking or are already thinking of embarking on a journey to become clinical social workers.
Yes.
And but some of them are also thinking, well, it's probably not such an easy thing to do, right?
Hmm.
When you have to listen to people all day. I'm sure you've heard that yourself, right? So, what do you have to say to those people?
I would
You've been
say,
on the journey.
yes, absolutely. I would say if you want to be a social worker, I believe becoming a social worker is a calling. So it's trying to find your why. What is the reason that I want to become a social worker? And then seeking mentorship and talking to other people who are in the field so there is an understanding of what the profession entails. Because the beautiful thing about social work is that we're everywhere. There's social workers in schools and hospitals and corporations and academia. We are everywhere. And I feel that mentorship is very important. I also encourage people who want to be social workers to read the Code of Ethics, to make sure that this is what you want to do, because to become a social worker is, there's a lot of transitions that you would need to make on that path to becoming a social worker. It's understanding, what field of social work do you want to go into? So I remember just talking to a lot of social workers and to help me better understand. I knew it was mental health, and I felt it was also important to explore other areas just so I knew this is what I wanted to do. So the mentorship is important. Reading the code of ethics is important in making the decision. But if you have the calling, I think it's a good thing. And it's asking yourself the why you want to do this. It is an amazing profession. And understanding that I know some people say, yes, we do go into social work to make a change, and also realizing that clients change your life in the process. I can go on and on about how clients have changed my life by their strength, their resilience, their persistence, in spite of all the things that they are going through.
Right. And you know that, very often when I will speak to students in orientation, I will also say to them, I'm sure that you have family members or friends who have told you you will never make money if you come into social work. When you get home, tell them that you met someone who told you it's not true.
Right.
And the field of social work, as we've been talking about, is so wide,
Yes.
and there are so many things that you can do in it. But you are an academic, you're a scholar,
Yes,
you're a psychotherapist, and you're a businesswoman.
that
And
is
I want to
correct.
talk about the business
Mhm.
shortly. So, do you see yourself as the same person in all of these roles, or do you see variations of yourself from one role to another? Because I know that in my work,
Mhm.
as a scholar and as a practicing psychotherapist as
Mhm.
well, um, it's there, I am constantly rediscovering myself. So that's
Mhm.
why I'm asking you that. Even though I bring the same body to every space, but
Right.
I'm learning constantly.
Oh,
And as a
absolutely.
professor, I'm learning constantly. As a
Mhm.
scholar, as a psychotherapist, as a good citizen of society.
Mhm.
So,
Yes. In answer to that question, each situation calls for maybe a different perspective or a different decision. However, I would say at the end of the day, the underlying foundation of being a social worker remains the same in all those scenarios. So, in terms of being a scholar, it's doing research that's focusing on mental health and the impact specifically on people of color. It's establishing a business that I wanted to be culturally sensitive, culturally competent, to challenge the stigma associated with receiving mental health services, which was the reason that I started my business. In being a professional speaker, it's also highlighting mental health and wellness and how do we deal with burnout and stress management, especially as social workers, where we have to admit that in the profession, a lot of social workers feel like they're on the verge of burnout, and what are some techniques that they can learn to minimize that. So while each situation calls for maybe a different approach, a different decision, I've always felt like at the foundation of it all, I am a social worker. And it guides my business. It guides being a scholar, and it guides my work as a professional speaker, because I feel like I always come back to it. Like as a social worker, how do you want to run your business? With empathy, with compassion. How do you want to do your work as a scholar? It always comes back to that. And in academia, being part of educating the next generation of social workers. So it's always there. I feel at the foundation, being a social worker and a mental health professional, it's still that foundation, no matter which avenue I'm navigating in that point in time.
so when did you decide to start your own business? And tell us more about butterfly counseling services.
Sure. I decided to start my own business because I felt that maybe to a certain degree something was missing. So I started Butterfly Counseling Services in 2019 with the mission of making mental health services accessible and affordable for a diverse client population. And as we've talked about, to challenge the stigma associated with receiving mental health services. So I felt that in providing mental health, something was missing if we do not address racism, discrimination, microaggression, racial trauma. So that's why I started Butterfly Counseling Services, to create a safe space to be able to address those issues. Also, when people were looking to receive mental health services, it was unaffordable. People couldn't afford it because either the practitioner, the price was really high, or they did not take insurance. So in putting Butterfly Counseling Services together, I thought, how do we make it affordable? So we offer a sliding scale. How do we also make it affordable by making sure that we accept insurance? So a lot of people in butterfly counseling services, a huge number, are now able to access mental health because of the sliding scale fee that we provide, and also because we take their insurance. So now it is accessible and also virtually. So, they don't, some of them transportation could be an issue. So now from the comfort of their own home, they can receive mental health services. So that was my vision in putting the practice together.
Okay, I am going to show this just as someone asked a question. This is your website,
That is correct.
right? And someone just asked me to ask, is to say, he wrote, I would love her, that is you, to answer if truly every mental illness is within the purview of psychoanalysis, or is there a nexus within mental illness and spiritism? Or do social workers simply turn a blind eye to it?
Mm. So, in trying to understand the question, meaning like, are we providing psychotherapy and also like the spiritual religious component as well?
Correct. That's the way I understand.
Absolutely. Yes, we do. So it would be sometimes clients are seeking spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs to be part of their psychotherapy. So when we're doing our intake assessment, we actually have an entire section that is dedicated to spirituality and religiosity, where clients are saying, this is really important to me. Prayer is important to me. It's how I cope. And I want that to be a part of my therapy session. So what we do is we always make sure if somebody is saying it's important to me, that they align with a therapist who is able to incorporate that into psychotherapy. So I am a Christian, so I do incorporate Christian counseling, where we do talk about the Bible. So if people are talking about certain emotions, we've gone into the Bible where people in the Bible are expressing anxiety or they're expressing anger. So they see that in the Bible, this person had the exact emotions that they are dealing with, and it's okay to feel those emotions. So yes, so that is part of our intake. And if somebody wants that to be part of therapy, we make sure that we make that a part of their therapeutic experience.
I was actually going to ask you why you have the bold first page of your the website as anything is possible, and then you
Yes.
said you're a Christian,
Yes.
and Christians believe very
Mental
strongly that
illness is on the rise, and there is an urgent need to provide lasting solutions and break the stigma associated with seeking services. At Butterfly Counseling Services, we utilize different treatment modalities that address mental health issues. We help clients become self-actualized and transform into the person they want to be, just like a caterpillar transforms and emerges as a butterfly. Butterfly Counseling Services is where you begin, believe, and become. We provide therapy for issues such as depression, anxiety, relationship and marital problems, substance abuse, grief and loss, self-esteem issues, life transitions, cross-cultural adjustment, stress management, trauma, family conflict, and many more. We believe everyone is unique, so our approach is interpersonal, client-centered, culturally sensitive, and solution-focused. Our services are tailored in ways that ensure they are affordable for everyone. For our online services, video sessions take place on a platform that is interactive and HIPAA compliant. We also provide online group counseling sessions for anger management, self-esteem building, stress management, parenting, and substance abuse. Why not take a bold step today to improve your mental health? Call us now at 646-283-2737 for a 15-minute phone consultation, or visit us at www.butterflycounselingservices.com to learn more.
So I was listening to your answer to the person who asked the question, and it actually just also reminded me of one of the cardinal principles in social work, that you meet the clients where they are.
Yes.
And so I really, really enjoyed having that question and having you respond to it as in that way, because I think that social work generally is a no judgment zone. And
Yes.
all right, so we do get to meet it once here. But you're a trauma expert.
Mhm.
And so I like, if you don't mind, to just take the next few minutes and tell us what we should know about trauma. For example, what is it?
Mhm.
And why does it make for an important conversation? From your practice experience, I'd like to know how impacting does any kind of trauma experience get in the lives of people? And what would you suggest for anyone who has had a trauma experience at some point? Um, and so I know that that's a mouthful, but just take it away and I'll ask follow-up
Sure.
if needed.
Absolutely. So trauma is a psychological or emotional response to a very stressful, frightening, disturbing event that has happened. So it could be war, natural disaster, sexual assault, a horrific car accident. So people are traumatized by what they have been through. And the emotional responses are, for example, people are having flashbacks, they have nightmares, they feel very hyperarousal, hypervigilant, depression, anxiety, or some of the emotional responses to this very disturbing, stressful event that has happened. And the reason that as a therapist, I encourage people to seek professional help as a result of the trauma that they have been through is the impact that it has on them mentally, physically, psychologically, as well as the impact on their interpersonal relationships. And because when we have gone through trauma, or we've gone through a traumatic situation, there is a change in the brain, according to neuroscientists. And what therapy does is it helps us rewire the brain around the trauma that has happened. So, for example, what I tell people is if I've been through, let's say, a traumatic event, um, for example, I'm attacked by a lion, let's say I'm walking down the street, I'm attacked by a lion. That becomes very traumatic, naturally so, because it's a terrible thing that has happened. Now, what has happened is, as a result of that, it imprints on the brain. So if, let's say, I'm walking down the street, for example, and I see like a kitten who's in the cat family, the physiological response is the same because the brain sees it as, oh, this looks very similar to what we have been through. And then there's that response as a result of that. And in working with trauma victims, is working with them to rewire the brain. How do we get the body to relax so we can rewire the brain so that our clients can begin to re-engage in activities that they were once enjoying but no longer do as a result of that trauma? So it's just this emotional response as a result of something terrible that has happened. And also vicarious trauma that I mentioned earlier, where it didn't happen to you, but you saw what happened. And as a result of that, you're having those emotional responses as well.
You know, I am happy that you used a real practical example. But I am even happier that you repeated the term vicarious trauma. And I think that I'm sure you've had this in your practice too, where children who witnessed intimate partner violence
Yes.
frequently as little children, now as adults,
Mm-hmm.
are struggling with things that they didn't even know were effects of that experience that they had in childhood.
Yes.
We know, I mean, there's enough psychological research that tells us that uh, adults can actually recall incidents of intimate partner violence that they witnessed even at age 2, right?
Yes.
So how do you deal with situations where couples come to you
Mm-hmm.
and you are seeing and hearing stories from one partner about the other,
Mm-hmm.
and that other partner does not really realize where it's coming from, but says to
Yes.
you, well, I really don't know that it's that bad. I'm going to change. And then it happens and happens and happens. this happens.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can tell that this has a long history. So how do you bring them to the point of realizing that this experience is not just something that came about today, but has its foundation in their history?
Yes, and that is a great question, because in the work that I do, I always highlight the fact that our childhood experiences very much have an impact on the present, and can impact our interpersonal relationships. So when we do the intake assessment and we do the psychosocial, we actually do go back and we ask questions about any type of traumatic event or life transition that had occurred during that point in time. So childhood, adolescence. And in having the conversation about those experiences, what we do is we try to help clients begin to make the connection to the current interpersonal relationships, because sometimes they don't make the connection. And it's in talking about those experiences, in processing those experiences in therapy, it's gently beginning to realize, oh, now I understand how that is impacting me in the present, because it goes back to the brain and how the brain doesn't forget. And that's why sometimes we might have physiological reaction to things before we realize there is some type of a connection to something that I have been through. So it is really having conversation, providing psychoeducation, without getting into a lot of those theories. Sometimes we talk about like attachment theory, you know, our experience with our caregivers, traumatic experiences, transitions. And then it's almost like the aha moment with clients when they realize, oh, now I understand that witnessing domestic violence, how it's impacting my relationship now, because again, a lot of the triggers are similar. Like the very loud noise, like somebody's making this loud noise and all of a sudden my heart's racing and I want to get away from them. And then they connect it to maybe childhood experiences. So it's a lot of connections. It's a lot of psychoeducation and therapy to help clients make that connection to how it's impacting the present and their interpersonal relationships.
Right. You know, there is a question here that I think is intriguing.
Yes.
The question is, do we know scientifically that traumatic experience can be entirely expunged from the mind, or will therapy simply help in coping with it? In other words, does it end permanently, or is it suppressed to an extent?
That's a great question. And I would say I don't think it's entirely expunged, but we learn effective coping mechanisms to be able to manage it. An example I give my clients is when I was about 5 years old, I almost drowned. And I remember my mom, you know, her arm coming into the pool, pulling me out of the water. And as a result of that, I became very, very afraid of water for many, many years. I didn't learn to swim until I was in my 40s. And now I swim very well. I can swim, I can tread water. And I can still tell you from time to time, before I jump into the pool, my brain still goes, are you sure you want to do that? Remember that you almost drowned. And then I communicate back to my brain, I know how to swim. It's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. So the experience wasn't completely expunged. I just now have the coping mechanisms and tools to be able to navigate around it when it does come to the forefront in my mind. So that's a great question.
Right. Yes, we are having a great conversation, and I don't want it to end. But I know that you are a busy woman, and so I'm gonna have to let you go soon.
Sure.
So I'll just ask you. You do a lot of charity work around the world.
Yes.
Earlier, I mentioned your work in Kenya, in India, in the Philippines, and I know that some of that work you do with your parents.
Yes.
So how did you get involved in doing all of this charity work? And what are some of the lessons that you have learned from those missions that you go on?
I got into charity work because of my parents. And I saw this at a very young age. Both of my parents in Nigeria had their own clinic, and they never turned away anyone that could not afford to pay for their services. My parents always taught me that you need to make a difference in the world. You need to leave a legacy of caring for others. So they do mission trips once or twice a year, and I go with them. And what we do is we go into communities where people are dealing with extreme poverty and see what we can do to make a difference in their life. So in terms of course, bringing the message of Christianity and Jesus Christ, and also looking at ways in which we can alleviate poverty. So my mom, as a medical doctor, bringing medication to those who don't have access to adequate health care, going into the schools and ensuring that they have access to books. I mean, I've been in schools where they have no books at all in their schools. In terms of my scholarship program, making sure as much as possible that young women have access to education because they can't go to school because their parents don't have money to send them to school. So it's a legacy of making a difference. So to whom much is given, much is expected, is what my parents would always say to me growing up. And that is a legacy that's important for me to make sure that in as many areas of my life as possible, I am making a difference and trying to make a change and being changed in the process as well.
Wow. You know that I hope your parents get to see this because they have definitely raised a great child that I know they're proud of.
Thank you.
And if I could speak on behalf of all Nigerians, I would also say that we are very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
You know, just knowing that you are able to, you know, you travel to Nigeria alone without your parents and
Yes.
and spend time there, and that you really think of that. And I don't want to end this without asking about, I know how, you know, you had this strong affinity with your grandmother
Yes.
in Nigeria, and how much you loved your Nigerian, you loved her.
Yes.
And so do you want to talk about that before I ask you what I think will be the final question?
Sure. So my grandmother, she's the one that I named the scholarship program after. So Victoria Ibironke Togun, an amazing woman in so many ways, where my grandfather died when my father was 11 years old, and as a widow, worked really hard to ensure that her 4 children had access to education, and worked really hard and sacrificed so much for her children. A loving grandmother. When I think about love, I think about her. She fought against aspects of the culture that at the time was way beyond her, way beyond her time. If she did not agree with something, she was very outspoken. And I feel that I got that from her. If she felt that things were not right, she would speak her mind. So she passed away in 97, and not a day goes by that I do not think about her. My daughter is named after her, to honor the legacy. My dad wrote a book, Victoria's Son, about his mother. So in a lot of ways, we keep her memory and her legacy alive in her dedication to her family, her dedication to her children, her grandchildren. And we all remember her very, very fondly. So every time I look at my daughter, I say, you are named after a legend. So carry that name with pride.
That is great. And I think some Nigerians will be interested in knowing if your parents, both medical doctors,
Yes,
never put a lot of pressure on you to become a medical doctor, because that's what we do.
Yes. That is very true.
Well, yeah, but Dr. Togun-Butler, I am so grateful that you came to join us today. And I really don't know how you balance all these things that you do. Finally, how do you balance everything with being a mother and a spouse?
Yes.
All of those things you have to balance.
Absolutely. I would say, again, I have to give a lot of credit also to my husband. He is one of my loudest cheerleaders, and he will step in whenever I needed to be able to help me. So it might be him taking the kids to the doctor's appointment, taking them to swimming lessons. He has really stepped up, to help me try to juggle everything. Definitely, I can't not give gratitude to God. Prayer is a huge part of my life where I pray to God about whatever my concerns are, my stress. I feel like prayer takes away my stress. I engage in self-care daily. I am true to myself. When I need a break, I take a break. I was just in the United Arab Emirates with some of my friends for a week. Yeah, so taking a break when I need to is very, very important. And also just delegating and reaching out to others for their help and support. And I have a wonderful support system. And it's because of the support system that I have that makes all of this balancing possible, because I don't feel like I'm going to burn out. I feel like I have a lot of energy because my support system around me is very, very strong. So I'm very grateful to God for that.
You cannot burn out because we need you. And we need you. Really so grateful. And I don't want, I'll ask about the children offline. I think I already did.
Yes.
And with their father, your husband, in education, you a scholar, PhD, their grandparents, doctors, pressure, right?
Pressure, yes.
so
Yes.
then at some point, it's like, okay, I am living with legends, and I better be a legend myself.
Yes.
But you know that I wish you very well, and
Thank you.
I will constantly be rooting for you and rooting for the children.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I hope one day I get to meet your parents. I know that
Absolutely.
very soon you'll be traveling on another missions trip.
That is correct. Yes. We'll be going to the Philippines.
Yeah, Philippines and Japan.
Yes.
Right?
Japan is more of a tour.
Japan is just to rest.
Yeah, to rest.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Get some rest.
Yes.
Yeah, UAE and Japan, all of that. But thank you very much for spending this time with me this evening. And I'm also grateful to everyone who's been watching and participating in the conversation. And this has been great. Thanks for occupying this space.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
And continue to do the great work.
Thank you.
All right.